This book was published in 1981. Okay, this falls under the genre of fiction. When we look into the perspective and the narrator of this story, of this novella, we see that Chronicle of a Death Foretold is told from the perspective of an unnamed narrator. Okay, that is, he is narrating the story of why this death is happening or how this death is happening, but we never see the name, or his name is never mentioned. So we can allege that this is the author. The unnamed narrator is the author himself, who is mentioning the pieces, who is collecting the pieces together. And what we see here is that the narrative style, every narrator has a narrative style. Okay, this narrative style is that of a journalistic narrative style. Okay, he puts all these pieces together in a journalistic narrative style of mentioning the past events. And what is this journalistic style? Journalistic style mentions the way a journal is being written, or any newspaper report is being written, or better to say, when those reports are being made in newspapers, how they are written. Those reports are mentioned in past tense. They inform us about certain incidents, and that is why this narrative is called journalistic. ওকে, যেখানটায় জার্নালিস্টরা যেভাবে হচ্ছে ন্যারেটিভটাকে বলে, the way the journalist express their views in their reports, in their um, newspaper reports, or any kind of report they say, or any kind of article they write, those kind of patterns, okay, that pattern is being used in mentioning or in narrating the story, this novella. Okay, the story as related by the characters is told in the third person by the narrator, who also uses the first person to describe his own involvement. Okay, involvement in this story. Okay, so this journalistic style is also attached with the tense of the novel. Okay, the chronicle of the death foretold, that is the chronicle of the death which is in past tense. Okay, and as I am looking into the text, what we see? We see that the title, okay, the title Chronicle of Death Foretold states that it is a novella, okay, which narrates the events in a chronological order, okay, which which narrates the events in a chronological order of how certain of a particular death is happening. Okay, however, the author uses the label chronicle with verbal irony when what is meant is different from what is said, because the events in the story are not revealed in a chronological order. Okay, chronicle generally mentions everything in a chronological order, but here what we find that it is not mentioned in a chronological order. Further, what we find here is that this title reveals that the story's death is foretold, okay, or that is known in advance. We know that this person will die, and that this death occurs at the very beginning of the novella. Okay, this death of that person happens in the beginning of the novella. So what we find here is that this too is undermining the real life journalistic pretense of the author. Okay, in short, if we look into certain things, we will see that the title contrasts with the non-linear narrative. Okay, as I have seen, or as I have told you just now, that this chronological order is not maintained. That's why it is non-linear pattern. And what I find also over here is that there is somewhat mysteriousness. Okay, there is some inexplicable nature of the events of the narrative, okay, which is being used by the narrator in the course of the novella. Okay, Chronicle of a Death Foretold is surrealistic fiction, surrealist fiction because of the number of the accidents, misunderstandings, misinterpretations, contradiction or confused memories that are present over here because of those things. Okay, these seem to completely undermine reason and human understanding and regarding how the events are told in the real life. Okay, the mind cannot make sense of how or why all these interlocking mistakes and coincidences seem to conspire so that together they make the death of the central character so inevitable or foretold. Okay, as we see the fragmentation of the stories, okay, the fragmentation of the stories that are other participants is immediately apparent, and uncertainty and ambiguity of the fragmentations that are there adds further to the surreal qualities of the narrative. Okay, so also what we see over here is that the weight of the surrealist fiction comes from its power to propose uncanny everyday mysteries. Okay, আর যে fragmentary ambiguous contradictions গুলো রয়েছে, those fantastical structure of the novella places it firmly in the category of surrealistic fiction. Also, as I told you just now, the journalist tendency that is present, uh, what we see over there is journalism is ostensibly the objective reporting of the corroborated fact to reveal the truth. Okay, the things that had happened সেইগুলোই হচ্ছে রিপিটেড হচ্ছে, সেগুলোই হচ্ছে ন্যারেটেড হচ্ছে গল্পের মধ্যে বা যে কোনো রিপোর্টের মধ্যে, রাইট? Similarly, what we find here is that like journalism, similarly the narrator in this novella, journalists investigate events by interviewing witnesses, okay, or those directly involved in the events, okay, or the chronicles or the events that leads to the death. Okay, they may also investigate by finding documentary evidences and records from those who were there or who conducted previous investigations. Okay, this activity appears in this novella when the narrator searches for and finds the magistrate's accounts concerning the crime. Okay, still what we find here is that the concept of perfect journalistic objectivity is a fiction. Okay, part of the power of Chronicle of a Death Foretold is created by the tension of a journalistic narrator or the journalist narrator who is trying to tease objective truth out of multitude of witnesses, all of whose testimony about the crime creates only more exasperating confusion about what really had happened. ওকে, কে কারোরটাই হচ্ছে ঠিকঠাক জানে না যে কোনটা হতে চলেছে বা কোনটা ঠিক, সে বিভিন্ন জিনিসগুলোকে হচ্ছে যাচাই করছে। ওকে, হি ইজ ইনভেস্টিং সেভারাল আদার থিংস। ওকে, যার জন্যে হচ্ছে সেখানটা বোঝা যায় কি হতে চলেছে, ক্লিয়ার, বা কি হয়েছিল। The journalist who seeks truth is what situational irony. Okay, so multitudes of facts will be there. Okay, so there will be multitude of witnesses. The journalist there should seek for the truth with situational irony. Okay, when what happens is the opposite, what is expected, the completely opposite happens, juxtaposed with the impossibility of whatever is found out. Okay, so Marquis worked as a journalist before the success of his novels. Okay, and this allowed him to write fiction full time. Okay, He has said that Chronicle of a Death Foretold was a perfect union between journalism and literature. Okay, so what I find here is that his experience is being used over here in order to portray certain things. Okay, we must also see that Garcia, uh, or his journalism or his experience in journalism and fiction are rather blurred. Okay, what he is actually doing here is that he is fictionalizing reality at the same time. He denies the possibility of a single truth. Okay, he is placing the exertion or the presence of several truths that might present side by side. Okay, and that is what is reality. Okay, that is no absolute truth. There is uh, no clear fact, and the placing of what we can see over here is that the multiple facts that are present, those are investigated, those are placed side by side in order to find out what it is or how things had happened over this storyline. Okay,